What is going on, everybody? The original Mako back with some more Gunfire Reborn content, and today we have our second guide for the second new character, the monkey, Xing. I think that's how you pronounce it. Maybe not. I don't know. Either way, before we get into that, be sure to check the links down below. As always, if you want to see me play this character on Twitch, you can check out that link down below. We have a ton of fun. There's a ton of cool people over there, so check that out. Also, if you want to become a member on YouTube today, the link is down in the description. As you can see on the screen, we have a list of our members here, and I can't thank them enough for the extra support. It helps out the channel a ton. There's 4 different tiers, and there are a bunch of fun, unique perks that come with each tier. So check it out. I would really appreciate it. It's a really helpful way to help support the channel. So that being said, also make sure you hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of the content coming out, such as the tier lists. They're coming soon. Get ready. But that being said, let's go ahead and go through our overview of this character real quick. So for his health, shield, speed, speed's average, maybe slightly above. Health and shield, he's like right in the middle, maybe just a little bit under tuned for his like overall stats, I guess. Not under tuned, but maybe just under average, just a little bit, but relatively fine in terms of health and shield. And speed is slightly above average, so you love to see that. Now, first, let's talk about his E ability, Soul Strike, which has a 12-second cooldown. You pull out a hair and blow it to the enemy. It looks cooler in-game, I promise. When it lands on the enemy, you summon a clone that performs Cudgel, hits up to 4 times to enemies within 10 meters. Every hit deals weapon damage instead of skill damage based on the held weapon. So it scales with your weapon damage, not your skill damage, and it's all based on the held weapon that you have, the base damage that does. Soul Strike has additional effects based on the weapon type. Each enemy can be struck by Cudgel once in a single Soul Strike. So, by default, the base version of it can hit 4 enemies, assuming they're all within 10 meters, and each enemy can only be hit once. Obviously, Ascensions can change that. The other big thing is that it scales with weapon damage instead of skill damage, and what type of weapon you have has different effects, as we can see right here on screen. So, if you are using a shotgun, then you have an additional 3 projectiles for Cudgel, which is insane. If you're using a sniper, you have a 40% chance that it becomes a crit and 60% total crit damage for it. With a rocket, there's a 100% chance that it'll deal explosion damage within a 6-meter radius and plus 30% total explosion damage. If you use a melee weapon, plus 80% lucky shot chance for the first hit. And if you use a pistol, every hit triggers an additional essence chain, which is your Q, that only deals damage, so it doesn't suck up the weapon levels. And you get plus 100% damage for the triggered essence chain. And if you use any other type of weapon, it just has plus 500 base damage. Now, which one of these is the best? There's 2. The shotgun one, which gives you plus 3 projectiles because that's just a load of damage there. And the rocket one, because AoE is always really good to have. And having AoE on your E means you have an AoE E, and that's pretty cool. And it does a good chunk of damage, trust me. So I think those 2 are the best. The others are all okay. But I just really prefer rocket and the shotgun. So that's what those special bonuses are. But now let's talk about the Q a little bit. 8 capacity. You draw out Soul Essence from your bracelet, dealing 1,050 damage to up to 4 enemies, reducing their movement speed for 0.25 seconds, and extracting their souls to enhance your own weapon by plus 2 temporary weapon levels, which lasts for 6 seconds. So, when I first saw this character, the first thing I said was, I got to try out the Q ability and do a Q build. And the Q build is phenomenal. It's incredible. It's amazing. The E build is also incredible and amazing. So, another character where both abilities you can build around and have a phenomenal run with either. So, there we go for the overview. Now, just like with the Fox, we're going to go ahead and get into the different parts of this character and kind of the best for each category. So first off, we are going to talk about Ascensions. There is one honorable mention we have here, but I'm basing these Ascensions I'm kind of trying to figure out the overall best ones in general. Once again, Ascensions are going to be very dependent on what build you're going with, but yeah, anyways, let's go ahead and talk about it. So the first one, or our honorable mention, is Strength Taker. As you can see, it decreases the damage from enemies affected by Essence Chain and increases your own skill damage and max shield. Why is this an honorable mention? Once again, I've talked about this so many times. The higher up you go in terms of difficulty, the more important damage reduction becomes, and having something that you can constantly provide damage reduction and increase your own skill damage and max shield, it's a great overall Ascension to get. Super good for defense, and it increases skill damage, so you get a little extra buff from that as well. And even at tier 1, 30% damage reduction is nothing to shake a stick at. So it's still very decent and very good. Not quite as good as our top 3, but that's why it's an honorable mention. So next up, we get into our top 3. Once again, these are in no particular order, but these are the things that I think are the best 3. First up, Concentrated Essence. Increases the temporary weapon level bonus and duration of Essence Chain. So at level 1, it's +3 and +2 second duration, which means every time you use your Q, your weapon gets +5 weapon levels for 8 seconds. At level 3, your weapon gets +11 weapon levels and 14 duration, and then for every enemy affected by the Essence Chain, you get an additional 1 weapon level. If you're going a Q build, this is paramount. This is the whole point. This is the fun. You want a weapon that is like +800. If you go Q build, you're basically trying to ramp your weapon as high as possible. And this is a very good way to do that, obviously. The increased weapon levels are ridiculous. It can make enemies feel like a joke because you're doing so much damage. And not to mention, even if you do an E build, this does increase your weapon level, which increases its base damage, which does help your E ability as well, because once again, that scales with weapon damage. So that's the first one. Concentrated Essence is pretty nuts and a really good one. Next up, we have Ancient Etching. An additional inscription is added to your weapon, which takes effect when this weapon is enhanced by Essence Chain. So the additional inscription can only happen if you are, in your temporary bonus after you use your Q. At level 1, it adds a normal, and then a rare, and then a legendary. This is just a phenomenal Ascension for any type of run, because inscriptions are one of the things that can make or break weapons, and adding an extra one on top of the ones you already have can be insane. Especially once you get to that legend inscription. I mean, it's a really, really useful Ascension to have here, and most of the time, if you're playing the character kind of correctly, you're going to be in your temporary buff state with your weapon, so you're going to have this extra inscription, I would say 80 to 90% of the time at least. So Ancient Etching, I think, is just phenomenal. Adding an extra inscription to your weapon makes it amazing and just super useful. So that's what our second one. And then our third one, to get a little bit of the E build some love, we have Raging Waves, which increases the range of Soul Strike and the number of hits. So originally, you can only hit enemies within 10 meters, and you can only hit 4 enemies. At level 1 of this, you can hit enemies within 11 meters, and you can hit 6 enemies. So a little bit better clear. There are a lot of these in this tree, the E tree, are pretty good, but I think this is the most important one. To increase the range that you can hit enemies and to add additional hits is kind of the big thing you're going to want to be building around for an E build. So it's super good, super useful, and adding additional enemies to be hit is really, really good. So that's why Raging Waves is going to be our next, or our final Ascension in the top 3. There we go. There we have it for Ascensions. Nothing too crazy on this character. Once again, it's relatively, there's a lot of really good options. Those are just the ones that I think are the best. Next up, we have weapons that we are going to talk about. This one's interesting. There's no honorable mentions, and here's why. All of these weapons are going to be like my top 3 weapons for if you're doing an E build. Because if you're doing a Q build, personally, I really don't think it matters what weapon you're using, because whatever weapon you have, if it's plus 50, it doesn't really matter. It's going to be hitting like a bus. So for a Q build, you can kind of just use anything, but these are going to be my top 3 weapons for if you're doing an E build on this character. No honorable mentions. We're just going to dive right into it. First up, we have the Fire Tower. Now, you might be thinking, why do we have the Fire Tower? That's not a shotgun or an explosive weapon, which are the two you were talking about earlier as your favorites. Yes, I know. But the Fire Tower has a base damage of 700. So it's one of the best weapons in the game in terms of scaling the damage output. You'll be hard-pressed to find a weapon that deals more base damage than that. And you get 80% lucky shot plus 80% lucky shot for the E hit after you use it, which increased lucky shot is great, increased damage output. Once again, this just makes your E ability do the maximum amount of damage possible. If you're scaling it well with your Q, then you're going to have an insane amount of damage come from this weapon. The lucky shot is nice. It's not as nice as having like a shotgun or an explosive weapon, but it is still extremely, extremely good, and a weapon I highly recommend trying on this character because it is super fun. And yeah, it's just, I love using it, and it's super, it's fantastic. Okay, it's fantastic. Next up, we have the Argus. And now the Argus only has a base damage of 82, but it is a shotgun, so you get the additional 3 projectiles on your E, and it is the highest damaging shotgun out of the pool of shotguns. So you're getting the nice E bonus, which I think is super useful, and you are hitting like a truck because you have the highest damage output in all of the shotguns. This is something that I didn't use until later, like a while. It took me a while to try out the Argus on the monkey, but as you can see in the gameplay going on in the background, it's very good, and it's very fun to use on this character, and it makes your E go crazy. Your weapon damage is going to be really nice. It's overall just a super, super, super good weapon, and I think if I had to pick one as the best weapon on this character, it would probably be this one. I haven't messed around with the Fire Tower too much, but the Argus is just so fun to use, and is overall, even if it didn't buff your E, like on its own, it's just a really good weapon as well. So the Argus is on here for being a shotgun and being the highest damaging shotgun in the pool. And last, but certainly not least, as you figured, we'd go to a launcher weapon here. We have the Shrieker. So why the Shrieker? Well, here's why. A, you get the buff from the explosion damage buff. So you have a little bit of AoE on your E, an AoE E, as we call it. B, yes, this does not have the highest damage out of the launcher category, but you can crit with it. It is an explosive weapon that you can crit with, which means that your damage output is going to be pretty nice, assuming you're able to crit with this weapon. Overall, this is a much better weapon than like the Tiger Cannon, like on its own in a vacuum, because you can crit with it, because you can shoot it faster, all this other stuff. So yes, it might not have as much base damage as the Tiger Cannon, but it's going to be much better for you to use most of the time compared to like a Tiger Cannon, the other example. So you get the nice launcher bonus, you get pretty decent damage on your E, you get some AoE from your E and your weapon, a lot of explosions going on. It's super, super useful, and I've had a ton of fun using this weapon throughout my runs on this character. So there we have it. Those are our top 3 for weapons. I highly recommend trying all of those out with an E build because they are super fun. Each one of them is super fun to use. Next up, we have scrolls, and we do have an honorable mention for scrolls here. And our honorable mention is going to go to Deadly Curse. So plus 75% weapon and skill damage and minus 75% max HP. So obviously your E scales with weapon damage. Your Q scales with skill damage, so you get a buff to your E and your Q. The reason this is honorable mention is because you are losing 75% of your max health. So it's not going to be for everybody. You have to be very confident in your build. But if you are, it is certainly a piece you're going to want to maximize your damage output and potential. Once again, I think this is fine on. This is really good on both builds. With an E build, you're trying to just ramp up that weapon damage, and on a Q build, you're trying to just ramp up your weapon level, which in turn is also ramping your weapon damage. So you're kind of trying to do that as well. So Deadly Curse is just a great fit for both of those. But the minus 75% health could be an issue. So that being said, let's go ahead and talk about our other scrolls here that are, I think, in the top 3. So, first up, we have Unfettered Will, which is plus 3% weapon damage for every 100 copper you currently have. It can go up to 30%. So, why this one? Well, once again, there are not a ton of scrolls, but there are a few that specifically scale your weapon damage, which is what you kind of want to look for because that is what makes the E ability hit harder. And like I said, it doesn't scale skill damage. It doesn't, I mean, it technically does scale with like stuff that says increased your damage dealt, but you kind of want to look for stuff that increases your weapon damage specifically. And Unfettered Will is something that does that. You just have to have copper, which shouldn't be too difficult to get. It can only go up to 30%, but you can also get the enhanced version, which is infinite, and it goes infinitely. So I think it's a really useful one to have. It's not going to give you the best buffs in the world. Like you're not going to, you're not going to be one-hitting bosses or anything with it. But I think it is a super, super useful piece to add to your build. Next up, Abundant Vitality, which is plus 75% total weapon damage while your shield is recharging. Why is this one on here? Well, once again, plus 75% weapon damage while your shield is recharging. So if you're using your E while your shield is recharging, it's going to be buffed by 75% thanks to Abundant Vitality. It's a common scroll. You're going to find it pretty often, most likely. There are no downsides to it. It's not like your shield takes longer to recharge or anything. You just get an additional buff while it is recharging. So once again, I think this is a super useful one to have. It's can work really well with some other scrolls as well, stuff that makes sure your shield recharging can't be interrupted, all sorts of stuff. So I think Abundant Vitality is super useful, and another really fun one for your E. Next, let's talk about one for your Q ability, because that's one that this one is one that can get a little bit crazy. And that would be Hidden Transaction. There's a 33% chance to enhance a weapon by +1 extra level when enhancing your weapon at a craftsman. If you're doing a Q build, pretty much the whole goal is let's see how high of a weapon level we can get. If you get something like Hidden Transaction early, I mean, I've been tempted to try. Now, this wouldn't, in single player, this would be very, 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 very difficult. But I want to try to get like a 75 or higher enhanced weapon on this character. And to do that, you would need Hidden Transaction. You'd also need a good way to be making money, whether it's the 50% bonus from, oh my god, what's that scroll called? I'm blanking on it. You lose some health and you get extra money. I forget the name of the scroll, but that's fine. Copper Miner is another one that you might want to have, but Hidden Transaction is the big one. If you can get Hidden Transaction and like early, especially in the run, then it's just, or especially the enhanced version too, where you get an additional, you can use the Craftsman an additional time. I mean, you're going to be just rolling in weapon levels. And I have yet to have a hidden transaction run on this character, but man, I am really looking forward to the moment when I do, because I think it is going to be so much fun. So there we have it. There we have it for all of the scrolls that I think are super useful. Once again, depending on your build, there's a lot of different ways you can go, but those are the ones that I think are just kind of the most useful ones for this character. Next up, let's talk about blessings, the last category here. And let's talk about our honorable mention, because we do have one, and that is going to go to Endless Assault, where you gain a secondary skill use every 3 seconds, and your secondary skill capacity gets doubled. So this one is on here for a simple reason, being your Q ability is super useful if you're doing a Q build, obviously, and it's super useful if you're doing an E build, because you want those temporary weapon levels to increase your E damage. So you want to be using your Q all the time, pretty much, like every 6 seconds at the least. And if you have Endless Assault, you're guaranteed to have one every 6 seconds, and you're guaranteed to have more. So there's plenty of options here, and I think it's super useful. It just doesn't provide any like damage buffs or anything, but you are guaranteed to have a Q at least every 6 seconds, which means you can have your weapon buffed infinite, like the whole run, guaranteed. The only thing that usually stops that is running out of Qs, but with Endless Assault, you can't run out of them in time. So super useful if you find yourself running out of Qs a lot. Next up, we'll get into our top 3 here. And first up, we'll go with the other blessing that is not unique to the monkey, and I think that goes to Overconsumption. So with Overconsumption, you get plus 300% weapon damage and skill damage, minus 50% cooldown, plus 50% movement speed, plus 50 max health and max shield/armor. And then for every legend, rare, and normal scroll, you lose 3%, 2%, and 1% of the total bonuses that were mentioned above. This scroll's phenomenal. You can never lose weapon damage, skill damage, cooldown, or movement speed. Like, you can never go in the opposite direction once you have enough scrolls. And it'll take a while to get enough scrolls to make this bonus worthless. And while you're not, like, if you get this early, you're going to be ripping things to shreds. You're going to have so much damage on your Q, your E, your weapon. You're going to be moving faster. Your E is going to be up more often. I mean, it is ridiculous how useful this is early. And if it really comes down to it, assuming you're playing with the new Mysterious Jokel turned on, you can just replace it in the 4th area and get something else. But especially early, and even scaling into late game, this is still a pretty decent blessing to have, and really useful on this character, I think. Next up, we go to one of the uniques, which is our good friend Essence Drainer. So when you use your Q, you get plus 1 extra temporary weapon level for every enemy affected by your Q. And then for every weapon level of the current weapon, you get plus 40% damage for your Q. So if you're doing a Q build, even if you're not, this is still really good, but especially if you're doing a Q build, you want this to get all of these increased temporary buffs. Once again, for my plus 75 weapon build, I'm going to be I need this. Increased weapon levels means increased damage, and then for every increased weapon level, it means increased Essence Chain damage. So you get a lot of really good things out of Essence Drainer. Super useful, and it's pretty good in pretty Q or E builds, but especially if you're going Q, you want to have this. It's phenomenal for getting you those extra weapon levels. So Essence Drainer is up there. And then the last one that I want to talk about is the Dimensional Strike. So you get an additional use of your E, and then you get plus 40% weapon damage for every hit from your E, up to 10 stacks, and it resets when you take damage from an enemy. So if you get all the way up to 10 stacks, then you have plus 400% weapon damage, which obviously increases your E damage as well. But the big thing I think for me and why I think this is so good is having an additional E to use. If you're doing an E run, then a lot of the times, not every time, but a good chunk of the time, like a lot of your DPS is going to come from your E. Your weapon still might be doing well, but most, I feel weird using most, a lot of your DPS will be coming from your E. So having an additional Soul Strike usage means a lot more DPS, and it's very, very good for that E build. The 40% weapon damage buff is really nice as well, but that's kind of just secondary to just having an extra E use, which I think is really useful. So there you have it. There it is for the monkey. We've got the weapons, ascensions, scrolls, and blessings all covered. And that's all we got for this character. There's going to be a lot more fun runs coming on this character, believe me. But regardless, thank you guys so much for watching. I really do appreciate the support. Check out those links down below. Hit the subscribe button. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any of the amazing content coming your way. Hopefully you all have a wonderful rest of your day. I love each and every one of your faces, and I will catch you all in the next video.